video is Unit 5, Part 5 of Reproduction, and we'll be looking at development, particularly animal development, and then even more so human development from fertilization throughout birth. A couple things to talk about before we get to fertilization. One of these is this concept of how organisms are both shaped and how they're positioned in their growth and their development. One of the things that causes this to occur is cytoplasmic determinants, and these determinants control how the cell divides. And what I mean by that is as the cell is dividing, these pieces of cytoplasm, or these proteins in the cytoplasm, and their basic function is to basically start to make the cell different. So if you look inside this cell as it's fertilized and this first division occurs, the right side has the triangles and the left side has the orange dots. And this is very important as the organism develops, because as the organism develops, say like a human, the top is different than the bottom, and the left is different from the right. And so this becomes very important in this early developmental stage. Which cell is going where, which cell becomes which. And if you think about the position of certain things, this becomes a very important part of that positioning. How organisms are shaped largely has to do with the concept of apoptosis. Yet again, apoptosis is programmed cell death. Here's a picture of a hand that's forming. This hand at one point was just kind of a paddle, and then the cells between each of the digits die, completing this hand. And so this determines the pattern of an organism. So you have genes that determine the position of things, you have genes that determine the pattern of things. And this is a picture that can show you what happens when apoptosis doesn't quite fix, when it doesn't quite work. And so as we're talking about development, understand that there's this whole underlying thing that's going on with the DNA that determines not only the shape of an organism, but where things are located. If these go wrong, then that pattern and that position can go wrong. So let's look at fertilization. The way this picture is oriented, from the left you have and from the left to right kind of represents the passage of time. A sperm cell has in its head, again, the nucleus, and then this section called the acrosome. As you can see in the picture, the acrosome is going to release some enzymes that are going to break down this protective jelly coating of the egg. And the purpose to do that is to get to these little beads, and these little beads represent protein receptors on the surface of the egg cell. Once those beads are exposed, those protein receptors, this acrosomal process is going to grow out of the sperm cell and make contact with the egg cell. And so just like we've talked about in cell signaling up to this point, when two cells make contact, they recognize, hey, there's a cell, that cell's not me, that cell is me. Well, the egg is specifically made to attach to the sperm cell. And so when that sperm cell comes in contact with the egg cell, all of the other protein receptors on the outside of the egg are released. And so this prevents other sperm from fertilizing that egg. The sperm begins to enter through the hole that is made in the membrane, and the two nuclei will eventually fuse. The nuclei of the sperm cell will fuse with the nuclei of the egg cell, and that will create this diploid zygote. The pieces of the sperm tail actually create the first spindle fiber for the spindle fibers for the dividing zygote. And then you get into this next state, which is called cleavage. Earlier we talked about when egg production is made, the egg takes most of the cytoplasm, leaving behind these other structures called polar bodies. Those polar bodies are done away with, the egg remains. And so this shows you why that is necessary. That zygote, when it begins to divide, skips G1 and G3 phases of interphase. The only part of interphase that it goes through is S phase, so that the DNA is replicated, and then the rest of the mitotic phases are carried out. And so it skips the growth phase. And so this allows for very quick division, very quick specialization of the cells. Even in this early stage, you can tell which side is top, which side is bottom. And that leads to the next structure here, which is called a solid ball of cells, or a morula. The morula is the solid ball of cells, and this happens within a few days of fertilization. That solid ball of cells will hollow out to become what's called the blastula. The blastula only has two layers of tissues. So it's an inside and an outside, basically. And those two, so some organisms, this is the end of their development. You take like a cnidarian, like a jellyfish, that has two layers of tissues. This is it. They're going to just kind of be born and grow. They're just a big old blastula. Well, with other organisms, that is going to change. And so here's a picture of a blastula, a little bit more detailed picture. The blastula has two poles. It has an animal pole, which is the top portion of the blastula. The animal pole will become the head, and then the vegetal pole becomes the not head. Basically, everything else makes the body of the organism. And then you have that cavity inside, and the cavity begins to form the body cavity of that organism. Well, one thing is missing. Most organisms have some sort of tube that runs through the body that has two openings, and that tube forms the digestive tract. And so that is the next phase of this, and it's called gastrulation. Gastrulation, or the gastrula, is created by the process of gastrulation. And the gastrula is where you have the beginning of this tube that is going through the hollow ball. And so imagine a balloon, holding a balloon in your hand, and you take the finger and you poke through the balloon. That's going to create this tube. And so very much so with gastrulation. And then this process of gastrulation creates a third tissue layer. And so real quick, just to talk about these three tissue layers, you have the ecto, the meso, and the endo. Derm is the last word there. Derm means layer. Ecto is the outermost layer. This is going to be like your skin and your nervous system. It's going to form from the ectoderm. From the mesoderm, this is where you have muscle and bone. The kidneys actually come from the mesodermal tissue. And then the endoderm, this is your guts, basically your digestive tract and your lungs. And so these three tissue layers are found in most animals. Again, there are a couple of animals that only have two tissue layers. And the way that this tube forms with the most primitive kinds of animals, this gastrulation, these animals are called protostomes, and they form mouth first. So basically the tube works from the mouth to the anus, the other opening. In deuterostomes, which means second opening, basically, deuterostomes form anus first. So the protostomes, more primitive types of organisms, some of them do not even have complete digestive openings, or two openings for the digestive system, whereas a protostome or a deuterostome has both, and it forms from the anus first. And so after that occurs, this embryo is going to begin going through some pretty major changes. The gastrula, first of all, the gastrula is the stage of the embryo that actually attaches to the uterus and develops into what we call the embryo. And during this embryo stage, there's a couple of things that are going to go on. First one of those things is called organogenesis, which is just the formation of the major organs in the body. Usually if something goes wrong in this stage, there's a miscarriage that occurs. That's why this first portion of the pregnancy is so important. Pregnancy is oftentimes divided into 3 sections, and those sections are called trimesters, just like we have semesters in the school year. Semester means half. A trimester is just 3 equal parts, and so this first trimester is very important because organogenesis is happening. Also, something that forms is called the placenta. The placenta is essentially the connection with the mother. It develops from the cells at the bottom of the gastrula, so not only the fetal cells and also the mother cells are going to combine here. The hormones created by the mother and the fetus are going to help control the development of the placenta and the communication with the mother's body. One thing that's important is that the blood between the fetus and the mother do not mix. So that's an important concept. They do mix at birth, and so that's where the mother can have the RH factor. We talked about that being a problem in immune system, where the second pregnancy can cause an issue because of that interaction. But up until then, there's no mixing of the blood. However, the placenta is important for providing the developing offspring with oxygen and with nutrients. Now the amnion is the sac that the developing organism lives in, and it's filled with fluid. The fluid actually has pretty similar concentration as ocean water, and this is found in bird eggs and reptiles, except for with birds and reptiles, they actually lay this egg in a nest or whatever, and then that egg will at one point hatch, but inside the mammal, or most mammals, there is something. This placenta and the amnion are all part of the same structure, and they're all developing the young inside. And so that brings us to birth. So a couple things with birth. First of all, first and second, or the second and third trimesters I didn't mention. In the second trimester, there's the growth of the baby, and the baby's getting more and more, the organs are getting more functional. And then the third trimester is primarily just putting on weight. So babies can be born at the end of that second trimester and still live. Not a good chance, but they can. Third trimester is usually when they're more developing, just gaining weight, and typically 36 to 40 weeks is considered full term. A couple of hormones associated with birth. One of those hormones is called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone released that causes the uterus to contract. It helps to expel the baby, causing the uterus contracts to help expel the baby through the birth canal, and that's what causes a lot of pain associated with childbirth, is that whole uterus contracting. Another hormone that is produced is called prolactin. Prolactin is produced to start the production of milk, and this is actually a positive feedback mechanism because the baby nursing causes prolactin to be produced, and the more the baby nurses, the more milk is going to be produced, and the more milk that's produced, the more the baby nurses. And so this is a positive feedback mechanism that occurs in order to, again, the idea is survival, and so that allows for the baby to do that.